Welcome, everyone, to the Psyched Soul Podcast, where we dive into the depth of what it looks like to live epic through psychedelic integration. In the past couple of weeks, I feel like I've been experiencing an accelerated expansion in my understanding of the world and of the human experience. If you're a human being at this time and you're listening to this podcast, you're probably aware of what is happening in the world right now. We have a war happening in the Middle East. As we record this podcast, just within 24 hours ago, Iran just bombed Israel for the first time in history. And I just read in the news that there was an announcement of a potential retaliation on behalf of Israel. And in the meantime, Gaza's in shambles. Ceasefire negotiations were just blown by the terrorist organization Hamas. And it seems like each country is competing over who is the greater victim, who is the perpetrator, while many people worldwide are taking sides to support the so-called victims, claiming the rescuer role. And we're basically looking at a traumatic, codependent relational triangle of, again, the victim, the perpetrator, the rescuer. And I've been sensitive to this triangle as I have been working on this triangle myself in the past 2 years, exactly 2 years now, and all the ways that I've participated in this charade, and not claiming responsibility for my life and, of course, my reality. And I'm at the point now, 2 years later, where I can see it happening. I can see it happening around me. I just saw it happen in the couple session that I literally just held in my practice. And of course, I'm seeing it alive in the collective, which makes me ponder more and more about how trauma bonds seem to be such a building block of the human experience. Like, I'm literally convinced right now, and have been for a long time, that trauma is part of it's a building block of the human experience. It's like a rite of passage of the human experience, if not the rite of passage. And yeah, and it just, and the word triangle, if you think about the shape, you know that we have these corners, right? Where it seems like when we take a role in each of these corners, we are opposing a different corner and the two other corners, in fact, where in the psychedelic integration, we're talking about the shape of a circle, right? And, we're also talking about the sense of integration being a type of a return to feeling belonging, a type of remembering, re-owning, returning to unity consciousness. And I feel like in the same way, the trauma bonds is the essence of the human experience. Such is the idea of belonging and returning to unity consciousness, which of course makes trauma work an inseparable part of psychedelic therapy and integration. And that's why I'm super excited about today's guest, who is an expert in psychology and integration, and of course includes trauma work in his approach. Disclaimer that this podcast is for educational purposes only, and we do not in any way, shape, or form condone the use of illicit substances or partaking in any illegal activities. So if you do choose to make the choice to engage with the powerful psychedelics and plant medicines, please do so mindfully. My guest today, Doctor, I'm already going into my Israeli accent here. Doctor, Dr. Ido Cohen. Psyched is a clinical psychologist trained by the California Institute of Integral. And let me say that again. Production, cut that out. Doctor is a clinical psychologist is a clinical psychology that was trained at CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, and also in the Jungian Institute in San Francisco. He is the founder of the Integration Circle, speaking of circles, and facilitates workshops on the different dimensions of integration and the intersection of mental health, psychospiritual health, and the entheogenic experience. We share that we are both Israeli American. We share in that we both apply Jungian framework to our respective psychedelic integration support systems. And I have
Mhm.
to say that Ido is also the only other person that I've seen break the word psychedelic with a hyphen, like myself, turning it into psychedelic. So, Ido, it's an honor, brother.
Thank you to have me. I just have one correction. I'm not Israeli American. I'm just Israeli. I don't get to have. If anything, I'm Israeli Moroccan. But yes,
Mm.
thank you for having me. I'm glad to. I'm excited, and thank you for that intro. It feels like you kind of threw us right into the hearts of the collective heartbeat. So,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
mhm.
Yeah. Thank you for receiving. So what is
Mm,
it about, how do you see this collective heartbeat at this time? How do you feel it? How do you articulate it? How is it beating within you right now?
mm. Well, I started when we were offline telling you that I feel like I'm still recovering from the events of the weekend. And you said when you were talking, I was thinking you used the word trauma bonding. And you made me think, well, before there's trauma bonding, there's just bonding, right? The trauma, usually, for some, it's not, they don't get the privilege, but usually we first get bonding. We just get to have an experience of bonding. And then the experiences that traumatize us consistently, perpetually over time start infiltrating our psyche. So you're just making me think that there is a way in which a lot of this is us experiencing the long-term effect of events on bonding, right? If we're talking about that region, it's such an interesting thing that in the region we call each other cousins. And yet there is such a severed bonding between all us cousins, right? We're all Semitic. And then there's so much repeating trauma that has severed that bond. How it's impacting me? Oh, that's a long conversation. I think it's the word of the word I'm using this weekend is it's all very sobering. It's continuously noticing my own armoring fall apart over and over again. And seeing what it means to let this perpetual state enter into me again and again and again, seeing stories that I grew up on as the doomsday scenarios happening in real time. And how do I respond to that? How do I react to it? So, how do I not dissociate, to use more direct words? How do I not dissociate? How do I not keep my heart closed? How do I not then, feel whatever feelings I'm having, like anger or retribution or fear or panic, and not let those things take over so I'm not perpetuating the same narrative and energies and behaviors that are just keeping us in this cycle. It feels very, very complex and heartbreaking, just repetitively heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And then I guess this dissociation, if we are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we are in agreement that trauma is a building block of the human experience
Hmm?
and that bonding and trauma bonds are essentially, that probably like it's like the deepest wound. It's like the core wound,
Hmm.
since, we've come into the world, embraced in our mother's womb and in that safe space. And then our first experience of life is literally being pushed out, yanked out, vacuumed out, whatever way you slid out, whatever way you were able um, to leave that the experience of full and complete consciousness. And your first meeting with life is the separation from the womb of your mother.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel that this image or this symbol or this collective experience that, again, no matter our nationality, no matter our religion, no matter, the family we were born into, we all equivocally share in this experience. How do you feel
Yeah.
this may potentially be playing into current world events?
Oh, you're making me two things come to mind. There is that beautiful Peter Levine quote where he says that trauma is the most, I can't remember all the adjective he uses, but basically the trauma is the most minimized source of human suffering. So that we acknowledge all these other things, but when it comes to that word has become so problematic because it's both overused and it's underused at the same time. And then there's this quote by Jung that I've been chewing on, that he basically talks about how all wars that we see outside are direct response to people's own psychic wars, right? That this is the external manifestation of our own internal, unresolved, dissociated from battles with our own shadows, right? I mean, I think we can agree that a lot of this is predominantly fueled by power or power hunger, righteousness, right? Ideological righteousness, and being possessed by some kind of fanaticism, either religious, political, or money, financial. So put those three together, whatever unresolved shadow you have inside, right? It's all those memes that say, how about we take all the politicians and give them ayahuasca before they go into office, or right? That all of this is really manifestation of the illness of our society, which is we don't deal with our shadow, we act it out. And this is acting out on a major scale that most of us are powerless and helpless in front. We have nothing to do but just sit and observe. And at the same time, we do have a lot of power because we are the collective. We compose the collective. And if we, in our own unique spheres, in our individual homes and realms, decide to not perpetuate systems that continue oppression, separation, killing, wars, we make a difference. Right? So I've been, that's for me a lot of, I've been sitting, it's like, how do you get people who are entrenched in the perpetrator victim, in the survival, kam lo gechash, kem lo go, right? It's be the first one to kill be the first one to kill so you don't die, right? So like survivor mentality. How do we emerge out of that as individuals and then as collectives? For me, the events that are happening and it's not just Israel, Gaza, right? It's Russia, Ukraine. There's so many places that we can put our finger on and see atrocities happening at the same time. But for me, more almost as painful as what's happening is to see people's response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who are sitting at the privilege and comfort of our home, and instead of trying to put water on fire, we throw in dynamites and gasoline and, use our words in ways that we don't understand the gravity of our words. There is something that social media creates this fake sense of sanity, like it being sanitary. But people read those things. People get impacted by those videos. People's minds get shaped by it. It infiltrates the psyche. And then that seed starts growing inside of you. And then you start waking up and you start finding yourself being a little bit more mean and a little bit less sensitive and a little bit less compassionate, or even curious to know what the hell you're talking about or what you're actually entering into. Right? So I think what we're seeing is really I truly believe that this war and what's happening, even what happened in Russia and Ukraine before Israel and Palestine became a thing, is more of a symptom than a cause. It's a symptom of than the cause of. And we're not doing a good job dealing with our symptoms.
No.
I'm curious what you think about that, Shiri.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. The question that came to mind as you were speaking, right, which you touched on, which I was getting ready to ask you this anyhow, and then I think we both were kind of like feeling the same thing, and that's what I've been really sitting with, and this whole like collective gestalt is, why is it that millions of people across the world that supposedly have nothing to do with this particular conflict in the Middle East, supposedly, not Israeli, not Palestinian, not Arab, not Muslim, not Jewish, never even visited, have never ever set foot in that land, have no relatives, have no friends, nothing, have suddenly overnight have become so invested in this conflict, this particular one,
Hmm.
when there are multiple other conflicts happening all over the world, devastations where millions of people have been slaughtered. Why is this one in particular the one that feels so activating to all these individuals?
Great question. I have no idea. I can start fantasizing about, the fact that it is one of the most ancient conflicts, right? If we go with historical, right? So there is something so old. And so is it because where that piece of land is located? Is it because of the position of Jews and Israeli in the collective psyche? And I can, I don't know. I think that's what makes this even more interesting. I was just talking about it with a friend who is Lebanese Jewish, right? So holding multiple, because we're also having a thing with Lebanon at the same time, right? So holding multiple identities, and also she is from the left, but having so many conflicting feelings about this. And we did land in the same question. It's like, what is it? What is it about that tiny piece of land? Right? Symbolically, why is that tiny piece of land so activating for people? What is it about the nature of the people who are in that war that is so seductive and attractive to the collective psyche? I don't know. I have no idea. But I think it's really, but I think you said it about yourself. It feels like an opportunity. And again, it's not to romanticize. There's real life things that need to happen here, right? We need to have practical solutions. But I think it's a good opportunity for all of us to turn the mirror onto ourselves. Like, how am I participating in this? At what point did I become dissociated and passive? At one point did my ideology started preaching violence and aggression? At what point do I freeze when I'm in front of this human condition? At what point do I go into flight? Right? Let me go online and tell people exactly what I think and post a bunch of things so I can feel good about myself. Right? There's a lot, for me, there's a question here of regulation. Like, are we even able to sit with ourselves before we go and do all these things? How much of this is really reactionary as opposed to response? And the big thing for me is that it really is a symbol of the fact that as human consciousness, as a collective, we have a lot to learn about what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, right? How do we not split? Can you hold it together enough? Speaking of integration, can you hold the feelings you're having in front of who you are and hold them together without falling apart, without choosing what I call the emergency eject button? Okay, let me just act out something so I can release the pressure inside. Can I sit with that pressure? Because that's the pressure, right? That's the alchemy that actually is going to get me to a new consciousness. I just had a conversation with Shiri, and she said something that really triggered me. And it made me feel angry and rageful, but also curious. Can I sit with it and let it really change me and talk to me before I send her a hateful, angry message about how dare you make me feel this, that, and that the other way? And I think for me, that's the biggest thing. We have a lot to learn as a collective to hold the complexity of what it means to be human. And at the same time, take care of the real business, which is people are dying and we need to stop that.
100%. And then I want to take that idea further of like all these great questions that you posed about the questions that we can each ask ourselves as we want to participate in this complexity, right?
Mm,
And I would like to also add the question of what is it within this conflict that is propelling me to choose a side, to have to choose a side?
mm,
Why am I identifying with one quote unquote sides, pain, suffering, victimhood, reality, whatever, more than the other quote unquote side? Why are we splitting? Why are we ourselves causing this split within the collective? And this, I feel like
Can-
literally, go ahead.
no, it's great. You're asking great questions. I think can we take a step back and wonder about, wait, what is my relationship with being a victim? How is historically that role, that archetype has been in me, imposed on me, caused, right? Where does that leave me? So then, because when I read a scenario or a situation where I see a victim perpetrator dynamic, but if I have a very strong perpetrator or victim, that's going to pull me. Do I even know my own narrative with that? Do I even know my own narrative with privilege? It is a privilege to sit at the comfort of your house and have a lot of opinions and go online and share your opinions and deny other people from having their opinions. There's something very privileged about that. And can I check my own privilege as far as like, wait, why am I executing my privilege in the right way? So yeah, do I know my victim self? Do I know my relationship with feeling powerless? I think a lot of us are feeling really powerless. I feel powerless a lot. And by definition, if you go even to nature, when an animal is powerless, it has two options. It either accepts its defeat and acts like it, or it will fight for its life and do all kinds of, right, primal, animalistic, survival-based actions to try and reassert some sense of power. And a lot of that, you can see it in nature documentaries, is fuel. It has to come with some sense of aggression as a way to compensate for powerlessness. So do I know do I know my relationship with being powerless, with being helpless? I think for me, those are the bigger undercurrents that are fueling, right? This splitting into, I'm either supporting the perpetrator or the victim, which leaves one thing that feels like a truth for me, which is the moment we're in that dynamic, we're already lost. We don't pause to be like, wait, how do we get all of the people, all of the groups involved in this dynamic? How do we get all of them out of that? So you don't be a perpetrator anymore. You're not a victim anymore. And we try to construe something different if possible.
Right.
And we're not even thinking about asking that question. We're just like, well, perpetrator or victim, I'm either here or there.
That's been my biggest beef with this conflict and with the collective in
Mm,
general, is that I feel like the public at large has assumed such a stronghold of these positions where like they're literally, figuratively, metaphorically, literally are going to defend these narratives and beliefs to death.
hmm
And I wonder, yeah, when do we let me reframe that. When will we be able to take the step out of this pattern, make a conscious choice to, first of all, identify that we're in the pattern? That's always the first step of psychedelic integration, right? Become aware and
Exactly.
acknowledge the reality. Accept the reality
That's the word.
as it
Acceptance.
is. Before step number 3, making a choice, a conscious decision as to what you want to do with this reality. Right. So this is kind of like my basic framework of integration: awareness, acceptance, choice.
I think you named it. You nailed it. I think the word is acceptance. Right. What's the AA prayer? Help me accept accept things as right. Change what I can and accept what I can't. I think the word is acceptance. I think it's really painful to accept reality. Usually reality to really fully, not just intellectually accept it. Oh yes, there are wars happening.
Yeah.
No, to really let your body feel the impact of that truth. To let your heart, to let your spirit feel it. I think a lot of people, when they go to psychedelics, right, so many people have experience of feeling the grief of nature, right? How we're destroying nature. And it's overwhelming because they open up. They know it intellectually. We all know that we're damaging nature. But then you go and that armor falls apart and you really feel it in your whole being and it breaks you open. And then you become vegan or you start planting. And I've seen it in many people. They come out, they feel like, I cannot eat an animal again. And they do it for 3 months and then they eat meat again. And not because they forgot, but because it's finding your right relationship. So I think acceptance is the big piece. I was thinking about you in this conversation and something came kind of serendipitous in a synchronistic way that, how we refer to psychedelics, or some refer to psychedelics as non-specific amplifiers. And I actually thought, you know what? I think psychedelics are more disruptors than amplifiers because they disrupt our usual way of experiencing ourselves in the world. And disruption comes from the word something bursting, right? So all of a sudden, something, our usual sense of who we are and how we are in the world, our relationship, there is something that bursts that bubble or bursts that idea and brings new information. And even if it's beautiful or shadowy, that can be overwhelming because it's not what we're used to. And I think it's the same thing with this. Like we said, how do we accept, first of all, let me accept reality as is. Can I let myself feel and be broken by it, broken open? Can I disrupt my usual narrative? And then when that happens, let me work with that, the impact of that for a little bit. What does it mean for me now that I feel empathy both for Israelis and Palestinians? How do I make sense of that? There are no sides. How do I feel about the fact that I'm just angry that I live in a world where war is still a valid part of reality? That there's literally a whole organization that is still discussing the ethics of war and saying, well, yes, you can kill them now because they try to kill you, as opposed to like trying to change the whole thing altogether. How do I feel if I let myself really take it in? How does it make me feel? And from that place, I start working right with the meaning and then the integration and then the actions. But it takes a lot of courage. It takes time. It takes willingness to put some of yourself on the altar of life to really accept and let yourself be changed. First impacted, let alone changed. Just be impacted first, then maybe change. I think for me, that is the true ego death. The 5 grams, machine elves is nice and all that, but this is the true ego death, quote unquote.
100%.
Right?
Oh, yes.
Ego disidentification hurts a lot more.
And that happens in this dimension.
Yes.
And it's important to name that because The motto of our show, or the podcast is, it's not the psychedelic, it's the integration. And not to say that, I do feel that the psychedelic experience is, can absolutely be in its own way impactful, life-changing, consciousness reprogramming, all the like
Hmm.
beautiful attributes that we attribute to this modality. But the real change, the real embodied change, where you can literally see your reality at home, with your relationships, in your workplace, and the way that you walk the earth, this happens in this plane, in this field, in this reality, the third, what some people call the third dimension, what we call the third
Hmm.
dimension. And like, as far as like what came up for me when you mentioned that, like that, how like it can be so difficult for people, and I think you just named something that is so true. Why are we just being caught up in, again, picking sides, having the battles on Facebook, um stay in the love and light,
Mm.
and to as opposed to, okay, like dropping down deeper into the grief of what it means to be human, into the pain of, into the loss, into the woundedness, into the shadow. When we integrate visionary states and a part of the psycho-spiritual process, I feel like, and we immediately kind of fall into the love and the light aspect of the work. It's amazing, it's visionary, all like these big ideas, or what one of my elder friends calls as ideas, which I love. Yeah, so we turn vegan, we wear mala beads. Here's my mala beads, right? We hang the prayer flags, like we put on like all this spiritual armor. And then like after a certain point we get tired of that avatar, and we realize, well, like my inside, my embodied understanding of what it is to be human, walking as a spiritual experience, or sorry, a
Mm.
spiritual being spiritual being having a human experience. I do feel like that is a benchmark of the psychedelic, soul revealing,
Hmm.
entheogenic process of our work.
Yes, I'm very much with you. And you said two things I want to circle back to. One is I'm in agreement. I think Earth is the dimension of embodiment. And embodiment for me is being able to be conscious participant in your somatic body, your emotional body, your psychological body, and your spiritual body. Now, yes, I can go and have extremely beautiful and powerful, like psychedelic entheogenic experiences in other dimension and learn a lot. But eventually I'll have to bring it back here. And to this embodiment, that's the only way it's going to become something a lot more tangible, real, and communicable. Because I can go and learn how to heal the world in another dimension on ayahuasca, but that's knowledge will be worth nothing if I can't bring it back into this physical form and see, okay, how does that mean? What does that mean for this figure, this body? And then thinking, how do I communicate it to Shiri because she might benefit from it, right? It's nothing is going to get translated. So this is our translator. This is where we move from ethereal stuff to concrete material or to concrete communication that is actually understandable. So I totally agree with you. And we all spiritually bypass. I spiritually bypass. I was walking on the ceiling for the majority of my 20s, trying to figure out how to land back. Like, how do I come back? Because up here feels so good. And it makes sense to me to look from up there on this planet and have a lot of opinions and ideas and criticisms and beautiful things, and which is necessary. There's a way in which I think about spiritual bypass now as almost like resourcing. It's like we have to go there
Mm.
to accumulate all these things, and then slowly we find our way to land. So we accumulate all these little tools and little ideas that help us actually come back here. And
I love that.
the other thing you said, and I think that's is to be embodied, you have to learn how to grieve. There's always going to be loss, and loss is not always something bad or sad or devastating. right? We can lose things and be like, oh my God, I'm so glad to let that go. Right? That thing is being weighing on me, like a negative thought or the devastating pattern or a relationship that really was sucking my life energy. Sometimes we're just glad to let go. But I think grieving is really such an important capacity to be able to do to truly change on a personal and collective level. Can I really experience my loss? And if it's a loss that makes me feel good, great, let me feel good. Let me see how good it feels to not do that thing, to not keep that addiction going, to not be with that person who doesn't honor me and respect me and treats me beautifully. Let me see the beauty of it. And if it's painful, great, let me feel that. Let me ritualize that. Because if we run too fast into like, okay, it's done, that's it, or we push through, right? This kind of shadow masculine approach to it, then we lose that we're not really participating and it'll only come back. And I think both to on the collective level, there's so many other masters from the African traditions and the East and that are masters in grief, right? And I can't remember his name. He's called the grief walker here, Jenkins, who
Huh.
also is like master in learning how to grieve and teaching how to grieve and walking in grief. And it's hard. Grieving is hard, but we're not going to change if we don't do it. So I appreciate you bringing both of those in, right? Embodiment means the full spectrum experience.
Absolutely. And I also just, I want
Hmm.
to name that I do feel that part of the reason that we are seeing the splitting happening in the collective right now, and I'm specifically referring to people that are kind of outside the conflict because I feel like this is like such a huge piece in the conflict. Ironically, like the people that what has not been part of the conflict is now a big piece of it because we're talking about
Mm,
like global opinions and relationships are being severed. Like I've had personally like
yeah.
multiple relationships been affected by the conflict again with people who literally have absolutely nothing, supposedly nothing to do with the conflict, right? And I
Mm,
do feel that part of the reason that uh, people may be having a hard time with the situation is because there are no spaces where they can truly express how they feel and feel
yeah.
safe enough to express how they truly feel about this. So yeah, so they're going to resort to thousands of years of history, like laundry lists of thousands of
Yeah.
years of history, right? They're going to talk about like, okay, like numbers on this side, numbers on that side. They're going to talk about numbers of like the day, numbers of days that the hostages have been in captivity, numbers of terrorists that have been killed, numbers of
Right.
starving, like everything stays in the numbers, like the cognitive level, whereas it, it's very difficult, it seems, to drop into the heart level and say like, I'm
Yeah.
devastated by it,
Yeah.
absolutely devastated by like what I'm seeing. And it's like we're afraid to say how we feel because we don't have the space to express.
True. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm very fortunate to in the beginning of this to try to facilitate grief circles and even do something with double blind where there was a therapist from Lebanon and myself and someone from here, and we did like a grief circle for about 90 people. But that's like a drop in an ocean, right? We need so
Mm.
much more. And I also think it really, and I you're making me think like, oh, how can we do more? But it's also both ways, right? It's creating the space for people to feel how they actually feel, but for also to people to actually come with the intention. So if we draw it back to psychedelics, of connecting to how they actually feel, not the surface level. I'm angry or I'm righteous or whatever. It's like, wait, how are you? Are like we said, can you break down a little bit more? Can you open up a little bit more? I have a friend who is Palestinian, and we've been talking throughout all of this. And not to make this like a glorified example, but we disagree a lot. But where we do meet at the end of every conversation is in our heartbreak.
Hmm.
And we both write to each other, I am so fucking sad and I'm heartbroken and I'm hopeless and I don't have, and we agree like collective consciousness is not ready. What can we do? How can we tolerate it? How do we support each other? And it's beautiful to me because all the other intellectual whatever just melts away. Like you said, the numbers stop being important. The who is right stops being important. It's can we connect from that place of heartbreak? Because when we're there, we both want the same thing: peace. She doesn't want retribution. I don't want more land than this. We really want the same thing: peace. Realistic peace, long-lasting peace, not some romantic version of, oh, come on, let's just make it peaceful. Why can't we be peaceful? Not the love and light version of it. Like, how do we create true peace? So yeah, I truly believe that you have a child and she's very fortunate because you probably teach her that. But I truly believe that most of us have not been raised with grief and mourning as a conscious thing. That our parents set us down and be like, oh, you're sad now, honey, because you're experienced loss and you're grieving. And this is what grief looks like. And how about we go bury your little, I don't know, that little doll that's ripped up. And how about we do a ceremony and honor the fact that that doll is not with us anymore. Who gets that? We're sent into this reality that is constantly confronting us with a lot of stuff that are hard to digest without one of the most essential tools, which is dealing with loss in a participatory, conscious, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent way. And then we expect it of each other all the time.
Right.
So yeah, I'm curious if you have a solution, but I think you're onto something that we need more spaces.
There is a space that I do want to name. Granted, it is for, again, people who are directly affected by the conflict: Israelis, Palestinians, Muslims, and Jews. They're called peace activations, and they're held by my Palestinian colleague, Ava Delak, who was also a guest on my podcast. I believe she was on episode 2 or 3. So you can find these spaces at peaceactivation.org. And this is exactly what these spaces are. They're just a safe space for our people to come together and to just process grief and what we are feeling. And I have to say, I've attended a couple of these circles, and they have been instrumental for me to even begin to face this reality. So the other piece of it that I feel is also important to name is that, our generation at this time, we are literally a bridge generation, because as you mentioned, Ido, our parents couldn't even name what trauma was. They didn't have therapists. They didn't have the language. We are literally the first generation on the planet that is learning to name these things. And therefore, we are bridging. Again, we are literally people that are walking on this path, showing up, doing their inner work on the transformational path, on the growth path, on self-development, whatever you want to call it. We are the first generation meeting these things, these experiences, and translating them. And this may be another reason why we are having such a hard time collectively moving beyond, again, the surface level feelings of anger at what we are saying. So I'm just trying to name, reasons behind why, and understanding, number one, we don't have spaces. Number two, because we didn't, we are first generation. We are literally called to, by action, by imperfect action, step by step, create and translate this new vision of peace that we are holding. Yeah, what does peace look like? If we're waiting, honestly, if we are waiting for our leaders, or the Hamas terrorist organization leader if we're going to take him and then the other terrorist, Netanyahu, we're going to take them. If we're waiting for world peace to happen when they shake hands, don't hold your breath.
Mm.
It will probably not happen in this lifetime, probably not in my daughter's lifetime, but peace will happen literally when we have these conversations between us,
Yeah.
with you sharing this heart-to-heart connection with your Palestinian friend, with myself. We just with Ava and I just shared a stage at Envision Festival. We were on a panel together that she curated, and we were sitting next to one another. And just like you and your friend, we don't agree on a lot of like the big issues, the big pieces of the war. But at the end of the day, we understand that we are going to look for something else beyond that. We don't know what it looks like, but we're going to sit together until we figure it out. And
Yes.
perhaps peace is literally just with it sitting together, and we've already accomplished that. Maybe it's that simple.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's no. At first, it's beautiful, and I don't know if that conversation is available somehow, but um, it starts with sitting together. If the hard conversations stay hard, meaning we don't try to like engage them ongoingly to make the hard less hard and then normalize it, and then it becomes welcomed, then nothing's going to change. You see that anyone who's listening, who is in a relationship or works with couples or families, knows that that's like, if the hard conversations stay hard, nothing is going to change. And not only it's not going to change, it's only going to get worse. Because the thing, right, that shadow that we're not talking about, or is every time we talk about it, our whole relationship explodes, just gets stronger the more we let it run the show. Right? So we have to create, I love that what you said, just by creating the space and starting to engage, we're already moving the energy. I was once in a lecture, and I should really search for her name. But this incredible, she's a transformative coach, said, her definition of power is the capacity to move energy within systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it because it's non-dual, has nothing with over, under, right? More or less. It's just the capacity to move energy within systems. First of all, you are a system. Do you have the capacity to move energy within your system? And then you and I are a system. Do we have the capacity and the willingness and the desire to move energy? And the moment we understand that we all have that capacity, you start reconnecting with the idea of power. So yes, you sitting in Envision and having that conversation, that's power. Two people having a really hard conversation in front of a lot of other people, right? Modeling to them, together moving energy inside of larger system. That's our power. So we stop being, right? Psychologically, if we go back, we move away from the infant looking to the parents, waiting for them to be saved. Well, like you said, we're looking at two highly dysfunctional, highly traumatized parents. If we're looking for them to bring us savior, like salvation, and we are bringing back our gaze internally and towards each other. Like, wait, you're not functioning, right? Anyone who's a parentified child knows that. That's a learned response for dysfunctional family systems. I am realizing that this is not working. So what am I doing? I stop relying on you and I start relying on myself. But we're talking about the healthy version. I'm relying on myself, but I'm also like inviting you, Shiri. And then our whole community, we sit together and have a hard conversation. And then every one of us takes it to their own other community and our families. And slowly, right, that consciousness starts spreading. But it requires us to sit in the fire next to the fire.
Yes.
Right? We sit at night around the fire, but we also are in the fire because we're all in our feelings and our opinions and our doubts. And like we said, can I stay open? Can I stay curious? Can I let you in? So that would be the vision.
That is absolutely beautiful. I can literally feel it in my body.
What's the feeling? Yeah. What's the sensation?
Oh, the warmth and the togetherness, the sitting in the circle, the return to community, the sharing, the belonging, And yeah, to me, that is, as we mentioned in the opening of this episode, is to me that is the essence of psychedelic integration: is
Yeah.
returning home, returning to unity consciousness,
Yeah.
and returning to feeling like we belong when we sit together.
I love that word. Belong.
This has been a wonderful conversation. Literally feels like a vision becoming realized.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. In our lifetime, amen.
Amen.
And we always conclude with a rapid fire round of 5 epic facts about our guest. Are you ready to dive into the fire?
Sure.
All right, let's grow. What's your favorite psychedelic?
Ayahuasca.
Favorite thing to do after a ceremony?
Stand outside and look at the stars.
One big lesson psychedelics have taught you?
If I move slower, everything is better.
One person, dead or living, that you would love to sit in ceremony with?
Ooh. That's a good one. Gandhi, Jim Morrison, Moses. That's
Well,
what came to mind.
yes. I'd love to sit with Moses around that burning bush. My Lord. What's your by the way, we know, I don't want to sidetrack too much, but researchers say that the reason he saw that burning bush is because he potentially ate a DMT containing plant. But let's
Yeah.
not get into that now. What is your secret to living epic?
Stubborn curiosity.
Stubborn curiosity it is. Ido, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
brother.
Shiri.
Really, it's been an incredible conversation. How can listeners get
Absolutely.
in touch with you? Let us know, and we'll put it in our show notes, of course.
Best way to look me up is through the Integration Circle on Instagram and my own Instagram, Dr. Ido Cohen. That's where all things go for now. So that's the best way to make contact.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. Sending you lots of love and peace and resilience at this time. And remember, it's not the psychedelic, it's the integration.